Coming up on this week's episode of Search with Candour, I'm talking all about e-commerce, migrations with the one and only Andy Frobisher. Andy has a lot of experience and we dive into a lot of detail, so stay tuned for that on this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Search with Candour. I am your host, Jack Chambers-Ward. I'm back in the Candour studio, as you can see, and this week I'm interviewing Andy Frobisher, a recent freelance SEO consultant with a lot of experience with a variety of different roles across a variety of different agencies. And Andy and I are going to be talking all about something we both have a bit of experience with. Andy has a lot more experience than I, don't get me wrong, but I've been dipping my toe into this as well. E-commerce migrations, what it means to re-platform from CMS to CMS, what it means to change your domain. Should you do all this at once? Should you redesign while you're also migrating and things like that? Lots of different things to talk about, and it's essentially an expansion on Andy's talk from Brighton SEO from September last year in 2023. So it's a really, really great interview. Please do stay tuned for that after a word from our sponsors. Our sponsor for this week is Wix Studio, the web platform that gives agencies and enterprises the end-to-end efficiency to design, develop, and deliver exactly the way they want. Whether you manage 10 sites or 1,000 sites like some agencies do, here are a few things you can do from start to finish in less than 2 minutes on Studio. You can set up native marketing integrations with Google, Bing, and more in just one click. You can save so much time by reusing custom templates, widgets, sections, and design libraries across all of your sites, instead of having to build them from scratch each and every time. You can easily create seamless handovers by adding tutorials, guides, and more to your client dashboards. And speaking of dashboards, you get a full 360 view of all of your projects from one workspace with total control. And whether you're working your site with fellow SEOs, developers, other marketers, you're able to work on the same canvas at the same time with all of your team members. And of course, you'll be able to leverage some of the best in-class SEO defaults such as server-side rendering and automated structured data markup across all of your Wix sites. That is time up, I'm afraid, but the list keeps on going. Step into the Wix Studio by clicking the link in the show notes or the video description down below and see for yourself. Thank you so much to Wix Studio for sponsoring us here at Search with Candour. Our next sponsor is Core Updates. That is the latest newsletter from the one and only Mark Williams-Cook. You may know Mark from his unsolicited SEO tips and his appearances on this very show. He started this podcast, in fact, and is going to be my co-host every single month on our monthly news recap episodes. But if you just want a bit more Mark, you want all of his unsolicited SEO tips, get them actually solicited directly to your inbox every single week. You get the latest episode of this podcast. You get all of the latest SEO news and articles that Mark has selected and thinks are the things you should be paying attention to. All of that delivered to your inbox every single Monday. So if you want to get, like I said, Mark's usual recaps and stuff, it is one of the best places to go for the latest SEO news and pretty much what you can expect from the best in the industry when it comes to the articles and news that is going on, any updates from Google and all that kind of stuff. Go to coreupdates.com and sign up today to get SEO news, brand new episodes of this very podcast, and Mark's SEO tips delivered straight to your inbox. Coreupdates.com is the place to go. You may recognize my guest this week from his Brighton SEO talk back in 2023. I've seen it. It's excellent. And we're going to be expanding upon it on this episode, funnily enough. Welcome to the show, Andy Frobisher.
Hey, Jack. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for coming on, man. I know we've been chatting for a while. We've been friends for a little while. We met at Brighton last time when you were doing your talk and stuff like that. And I know you have very recently journeyed into the world of freelance SEO consulting, which is very exciting and nerve-wracking as well, I guess. Exciting and nerve-wracking at the same time.
Yeah. Yep, all at the same time, constantly. Yeah, it's like a beautiful mix of multi-sided scariness.
I know a lot of people seem to be moving in that direction. A lot of people, whether going from in-house or agency kind of stuff. So huge credit to you for taking the jump. I know we had Hannah Butcher on the show a few weeks ago, or Matt Coley a couple of months ago as well, who we also met at Brighton SEO, talking about that journey going freelance and stuff like that. So very, very cool to have you on. Folks, I will put links in the show notes if you do want to go and check out Andy's work and Andy's websites and all that kind of stuff. Go and follow him on social media, all that kind of stuff. Andy's doing awesome work. So check the video description if you're watching on YouTube, show notes on Spotify. You know the drill by now if you're a podcast listener. All the links are down below. You can find them nice and easily. I will also put a link for Andy's talk from Brighton SEO to their YouTube channel as well. Because like I said, it's kind of the episode where we're going to expand upon that, right? That's kind of the topic for this week. We're going to talk about e-commerce migrations, which is something I love talking about. I know it's something you have a lot of experience and you love talking about, Andy, and was kind of the topic of your Brighton SEO talk. And we're going to kind of take that 20-minute section and talk about it for 40, 50 minutes, something like that, and give us a bit more room to go into a bit more detail and have a chat about stuff. So I guess my first question to you is, why is this the topic you wanted to bring to the podcast? Why is something you're so passionate about in SEO?
Yeah, so it goes back to my days when I first started in digital marketing, really. So I've not always been in SEO. I originally started as just a marketing executive for a full-service digital marketing agency. They did everything, literally, digital marketing, even offline marketing. However, a big chunk of their business was essentially website design development. As part of those projects of people wanting a new website, 9 times out of 10, it was a migration. In fact, I'll probably say 9.9 times out of 10, it was probably a migration. Because even if you remain on the same platform, you're having a fresh version of that platform, so it's still technically a migration. So I did a lot of these types of projects as I went into kind of like account management and project management roles within that business. So a lot of the day-to-day work I was doing was around rebranding, new fresh designs, brand new website development, and then the migration parts of that for SEO, PPC, various other aspects. So I did a lot of that before I decided, actually, I really like this SEO part of it and I want to focus on that. So when I got my first job as in an SEO role, I felt like I had quite a lot of experience doing migrations anyway. And then that SEO focus has really sort of like honed in those migration skills and knowledge, I would say.
Yeah, I have a similar kind of path, honestly, because I started off, my first job out of university was I think technically my title was marketing and communications executive or something like that. Like absolute minimum wage, bottom of the rung, coming in, working for student accommodation of all things, which is weird. I had a couple of clients who've been student accommodation ever since, but yeah, that was my first kind of job. And totally agree with you, mate. Like you end up working on certain projects, and I really like that kind of journey where you start off fairly broad and you work out what you fall in love with, right? You find the bits and pieces and you're like, oh, I've done a bit of PPC, I've done a bit of SEO, I've done a bit of like print marketing, I've been designing and printing flyers and all kinds of bits and pieces. I'm like, actually, this SEO gigs, I quite enjoy this. Yeah, it's always
pretty
a nice
much exactly how it fell into.
I think it's common for a lot of us, to be honest, because I was saying this to Ray Sadiq the other day, who will be coming up on the show in a couple of weeks. How, like, are there people now in 2024 who are like just graduating or just getting their first jobs or whatever they're doing, thinking, "Oh, I can't wait to get into SEO." Like, is that now is it enough of an industry where that's a brain process? Where you and I were younger, Andy, that wasn't even a thought process. At high school, I had no. It was around, but I was ignorant to it for me. And I find it fascinating that a lot of people are suddenly going to be like, "Oh, I can't wait to be a PPC guy or an SEO person or whatever it is."
Yeah, I mean, I'd be surprised if that's the case, but it'd be lovely. I think, like I said, people fall into a generalist bucket, whether that's search marketing, whether it's strategy, whether it's just, social media. And then I imagine people funnel into different areas that they like. And find out they're good at. Probably the exceptions are probably like social media and PR, because they're so easy to talk about and so easy to, see what goes on, because people will consume that kind of
Yeah, they're a
all
lot
the
more
time.
visible and a lot more
Yeah,
glamorous, aren't they? Kind of.
yeah.
So we're going to talk about migrations, and I love this topic. I've done quite a few here at Canada. I've done a couple at my previous agency as well, but I know you have done a lot in your career. And
Yeah.
I was rewatching your Brighton SEO talk a few days ago, and kind of like going through your history and your process with it. And I find it fascinating that just straight away, even when we were just chatting just now at the start of the episode, you instantly start talking about different types of migrations, right? Because I think so many
Mhm.
people think about, oh, if you're moving domain, you're going from .com to .co.uk or vice versa, that's a migration. People forget there are so many different options and so many
Yeah.
different versions. So I guess, should we start with thinking about those different types of migrations and kind of how they affect each other? Should we do them all at the same time? Should we do them individually? Should you kind of space them out? So let's start with, what are the kind of main types of migrations that we
Yes.
can see
So,
in digital marketing?
like I said, most people will think of a migration as like one URL to another URL. But there's other types of migrations to that. There could be site protocol migrations, so HTTP to HTTPS. We don't see that often these days because everyone is very much aware of HTTPS, and it's pretty standard now. But very rarely you do occasionally still come across those HTTP sites. Subdomains. So are you going from www to non-www, or maybe are you migrating a blog from a subdomain to a subfolder? Those types of migrations. And then you've got your top level domain changes as well. So are you going from .co.uk to .com? Or quite simply, your domain name is changing. Maybe you've rebranded, and you need to ultimately change your domain because of that rebrand. It could be, and a really good example at the moment with ecommerce, they changed their domain to
You beat me to it
woo.com.
by
Yeah,
seconds.
and they've realized now that because of the historic value of WooCommerce, they're actually migrating back to WooCommerce. So it's not always a straight cut thing, and there can be a lot of complications around a domain name change. That's with any
Yeah,
migration.
definitely. WooCommerce to woo.com is such a fascinating one. And
Well,
then to see kind of like LinkedIn and Twitter and so many people who keep an eye on this sort of stuff absolutely explode with, this is going badly, what's happening here? And then
yeah,
to see them then wind it back, like you said, a matter of days later, in the fact that, I think you're totally right. The strength of the brand is there for the people that are in that industry. Anybody who works in e-commerce probably has, not only knows WooCommerce, but has probably worked on a site that has
yeah,
WooCommerce. I know I have a couple of clients right now who are working with WooCommerce stuff. And I guess that brings up the next question of, why would a business want to migrate, right?
yeah.
You mentioned rebranding there. I think that's a huge part of it. That can certainly drive a domain name change, or going from WooCommerce to Woo or something like that. But there are quite a few different reasons for businesses to go through a migration,
Yeah,
right?
there's, in my experience, it's usually comes down to a business decision. It's very rarely, we think we're going to improve our SEO value by doing this. It's quite often what I've come across, especially when there is a marketing department and a product team department. It's quite often product own the website, and I've done a lot of migrations where it's actually the marketing team taking back more control, so they can control, edit as many pages as they want without interfering on product. So, for example, I've worked with a client in the sort of like heating energy space. Their product team historically owned the whole website. Really hard to make changes for them and for us. And what they ended up doing was replatforming sections of the website so they could have full marketing control. But then when it came to actual product pages, that's all done by product in the background. Similar as well with a site that licensed music for YouTube I worked with. Again, they didn't have that marketing control, so they actually moved the product side of it to a subdomain, and all of the marketing side of it was on their main domain that they had full control of. So that is something that I come across quite often, is that lack of marketing control, really. And then maybe there's a lack of functionality. Maybe you're on an old, outdated version of a CMS, and it isn't doing what you need it to do. You've just got blank, boring page templates, and you want drag and drop options. You want to have it fully customizable. Maybe you want to move to headless CMS because it offers so many more benefits with linking up to different product feeds or an app or various things like that. Maybe you're just on a really old version of a CMS, and the only way around it is to completely re-platform or go from one major version to another version. Quite often with WordPress is probably slightly different, although if you're really far back, you're probably just better doing a fresh install. Like Magento 1 to Magento 2 was a big thing 5 years ago. They stopped supporting it, I think, 2.5, 3 years ago as well. So there's a lot of e-commerce companies having to essentially rebuild their website because there was no clear sort of like upgrade between 1 and 2. You had to just basically rebuild in 2. So that is something that happens quite a lot. I've done a lot of work with Umbraco before. When I was still working for a full service agency, I think we were on Umbraco 8. I think we're on Umbraco 12 now. And you won't be able to migrate from 8 to 12. You'd have to, you won't be able to upgrade easily between 8 and 12. It would be a full-on migration. So there's things like that happens very regularly. Another one might be that it was just done 10 years ago, and development and practices have just improved dramatically in the last 10 years, that it requires to be completely rebuilt. There are still companies that might still have websites that were developed in 2014, 2015, when we were just kind of going down the responsive route and haven't really touched it since. So that can also happen, obviously not as often as it probably would have 5 years ago, but you do still see some of those instances. And then probably the other one is sometimes you just get new management in and they're more familiar with a different platform or a different way of working, and they want to change it to something they're more comfortable with. We do see that occasionally happen where they'll then start getting the feelers out with development companies to sort of see and get quotes and get prices because they're a fan of WordPress, or they've got a real disdain for Shopify or something random like that. In fact, I had it with a client last year that did a migration purely because they had a dislike for Magento 2. So it was a perfectly good site where doing perfectly fine, but the MD didn't like Magento 2, so we moved to Shopify. So things like that do happen as well in the background.
Yeah, I've definitely had that before, where you get a marketing manager, managing director, whoever it is, especially if they're like first working in that role, or they want to make a change and make an impression, right? They want to come in, throw their weight around a little bit and say, yeah, I'm making a big change about this. I'm going to suggest a site migration, and I've got the power to do that. And all the SEO people are like, oh no, and all the developers are like, oh no. I think it's definitely common where you get, like you said, that kind of push from the client side of things. I had it my first job in marketing, that student accommodation side of things. We were talking about it from, it just looks a bit old and rubbish. And bear in mind, this was 10 years ago, so I don't know what site they're on now. I haven't checked in a very long time. But like thinking about you said mobile responsiveness being a perfect example there, right? We're moving towards mobile friendly, and now we're mobile first for so much of our stuff in terms of web design, even when it comes to Google indexing and all that kind of stuff. That wasn't necessarily the thought process pre-smartphone. So, when I'm going to university in 2009, that's the era of the first iPhone. So I was just on that cusp of kind of coming around and seeing the kind of advent of smartphones being the thing that is the main browsing device for so many people.
Yeah.
And having that conversation, this would have been 2014, 2013, something like that. And I was like, maybe, a lot more people are using mobile devices. There was a developer guy who was also saying the same thing. And it hadn't even occurred to the upper management and stuff, and that was even a requirement where, well, most of our customers are probably looking on, who uses a mobile to browse these days? And that's not a thing yet. And we looked at the analytics like, oh, quite a lot of people are actually using different devices. And I think when you're having those conversations, there's so much data you can use to justify decisions, to understand why you should go in a particular direction or another. I'm always an advocate for data-driven decisions. I know you are as well, Andy. Like, you probably pretty much shouldn't be making a big decision about your site on a whim or just because somebody else said you should do it or anything like that. There should be an actual reason.
Yeah.
And we'll get onto it later, but there can be actual benefits from migrations, right? There are positives to this. It often sounds all doom and gloom and can be a bit stressful and all that kind of stuff, but there are actually, significant reasons why you would want to do it, and you can actually come out better for it as well. And I think there's a lot of that kind of negative connotation to it. A lot of people see it as, we've just done one with a client earlier this year. It was very stressful, don't get me wrong, but they're seeing big improvements now thanks to our move. We, funnily enough, went from WooCommerce to Shopify, as we were just talking about, and have seen a transformation just simply from, the members of their team who aren't necessarily, didn't start out in digital marketing are now the people that are putting the products on the page and updating the product feeds and stuff like that. And they're like, oh, it's just so much better. It's so much quicker for me to update when this goes out of stock or when this is seasonal and all this kind of stuff. Can be tiny little things like that just make the client, or if you're in-house, the company you're working for, like, making that process that much simpler can make so many people happier in that journey and in their job as well.
Absolutely.
So speaking of seasonal stuff,
yes,
we're going to talk about when's the best time to migrate, because I have had this conversation with clients definitely before, where it was a client who was kind of conscious of, they were doing a lot of like flowers and kind of stuff like that. So Mother's Day is huge for them. Valentine's Day is big for them. A lot of those kind of like big, some kind of the smaller holidays, I guess. And I also had a client, thankfully we didn't do a migration with them, where they did like 80% of their annual revenue around the Christmas period. And we were having conversations with them about, they are on Magento, funnily enough. We're talking about upgrading their Magento and like, oh yeah, don't do, like, as soon as it gets to like August or September, everything is locked down and we're not touching anything until, end of January, basically, when we're through the Christmas period. So I guess my question to you is, when is the best time to migrate, Andy? Is there a right and wrong answer to that?
I would usually recommend to a company, most businesses will have a period where it's quieter than another part of the year. So you're minimizing the risk because you're getting less traffic, you're expecting less money. So if you are going to see a short-term dip, that's the safest time to maybe do that. However, not every business is like that. It can be busy all year round. If you're incredibly seasonal and Christmas is your busy period, don't be migrating even in Q3, because that is the run up to your business period. But that Q1 really is the time where you should be hitting that migration button. So it's really, again, like you said, use the data available to you to try and make the best informed decision as to when is that safest time to do it, and have a contingency in place as well if you don't hit that deadline. Is there a secondary time or option which you feel might also be safe? Because again, you don't want it to overrun and then you end up migrating into a peak period.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. The risk assessment side of things, the risk management side of things is
Mhm.
such a huge factor running up to the actual migration itself, right? I think that's a conversation we have a lot with clients here where we're trying to understand, like we said, what are the benefits, what are the drawbacks, what are the potential issues we could be facing here. And like you said, if you're migrating during a process, take my example of 80% of the annual revenue is done in like a 3 out of the 12 months of the year,
Mhm.
essentially. If that changes significantly, if you drop 10% of that compared to dropping 10% in the summer when there's not that much, that 10% becomes a very big number very, very
Yes.
quickly and has a massive impact on the business as a whole. And I think that's something we talk about a lot on the show, is those like little shifts in percentages when you're dealing with such large numbers can make such a big difference. And I
Yeah.
often talk about it in the context of, search engines dealing with trillions and trillions of pages or billions of pages or whatever it is. And you see like Bing's market share has gone up by a couple of percent over the last few months. Like, that's a massive deal. They are massive numbers. And the same can be true for client revenue. From my experience,
Yeah, absolutely.
having a 10% change on an off season is like, yeah, whatever. Having it at peak time is squeaky bum time.
Yeah, and we've got to think about our own KPIs as well. Quite often,
Mm,
we're targeted to drive a certain amount of growth. So, you know, the onus is back on us as well to really showcase to clients why doing it at that period is a really bad idea. And um, this is how much, forecast potentially. This is how bad it could get if you do it, in Q3, Q4. Yeah, it's really important to use that data available to you to sort of like really show that, like I said, those small percentage changes can have a big impact. Even the conversion rate, if your conversion rate drops down 1%, that's a big impact for most e-commerce businesses. It doesn't sound much on the face of it, but it is. It really is. So yeah, it's really important to get it right.
yeah, 100%. And I think that's the side of it where that preparation stage is so important, right? Obviously, the
Mhm.
big day comes and everybody's sitting there biting their fingernails and worrying about launch day and all that kind of stuff. But that lead up to it, I think, is just so crucial to the whole process. So I guess the next question is, when should the SEOs get involved in this? We're talking about developers actually doing the building and
Yeah,
clients having these conversations and the marketing teams and all this kind of stuff. When should we as SEOs get stuck in and have our voices heard during this process?
yeah. Really passionate about this one because I think every SEO will agree that they've been handed migrations at the last minute or key decisions have been made and they've then been brought involved because, oh, maybe we should get an SEO involved in this. It has to be at that very start of the project kickoff meeting. And why? Because every milestone where there's a sign off by stakeholders, there needs to be an SEO sign off as well to say everything that we're signing off is good from an SEO organic point of view. Um, it's all about minimizing the risks as much as possible. So when you do migrate, hopefully it's a good migration. But obviously, there's always going to be a form of calculated risk. There might be a business decision. Then you might be forced to make URL changes. Shopify, WordPress. You're going to have URL changes, no matter what you do. Now, WooCommerce to Shopify, you're going to be forced to change your category pages to collections, for example. So it's really all about making sure that there is an SEO at that project management table, working with them, minimizing those risks at each stage, and SEOs having that say into what should and shouldn't be done.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think this is something a lot of agencies could be a lot better. As you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
like full service digital agencies there, Andy. We are that here at Canada. Like
Yeah.
we do design and build stuff, we do branding, we do SEO. I do a podcast as well, and there's so many different like arms and departments to the company. I think this is so something that is so common in so many agencies where it feels very isolated. Like you'll work on one side of things, and even if the client isn't necessarily an SEO client, they're just signed up for the migration through your development team or through your design and build team or whatever it is, still having that SEO side of things and working that into the project, like you were saying, get someone from the SEO team at that table as soon as possible. So you're part of those conversations with the client. You can understand where the client is coming from, as well as the project managers, as well as the developers. Like, I think that's something so many agencies could do so much better, is having that kind of integrated actual full. They call themselves a full service agency, but actually it all feels very kind of segmented.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Lots of
have
nodding
vivid memories of, back in the day, we would be almost ready to launch a project, and then someone would be like, "Oh, we need to pass it off to SEO to do their bit," right at the end, and the SEO absolutely losing it, because he's not been involved in the decision making. He doesn't know what's been agreed and why it's been agreed, and essentially he's been left to write thousands and thousands of redirects. Because that's essentially sometimes what people think is just needed. And yeah, that's really the hardest bit, is when it's thrown on you at the end and you've got all these questions because you've done it this way, that way, and this way. But those decisions have been made. You've got to kind of live with it. And that's where the risk has suddenly become much, much, much more higher. From a business point of view. What I like to also say as well is to really try and educate businesses, business owners, managing directors, marketing execs, whoever you can talk to, really educate them on that return of investment side of it. Ultimately, they're paying you to get a return on their money, to see a growth in profit and revenue, and educate them as much as possible on, look, I am your gatekeeper really to protecting that growth and that revenue. And if they start to see it that way, they'll want you on every call. They'll want you to agree to every decision, because you're kind of saying, look, we've got these KPIs that we're contracted for. If you want us to meet these KPIs, you've got to get us involved. If not, then we're not responsible if things go tits up, basically.
Yeah, I think communicating those KPIs is so important, and understanding what the business's goals are at the end of the day, and like you said, who's accountable for what. That is such a key part of it, and something, again, I think a lot of people don't really pay enough attention to. Like, who is responsible for this? Who is actually doing, like you said, we're just jumping straight to redirects. Have we actually thought about the URL structure? Is there a way of doing it where it's actually cleaner and better and easier to navigate? Or are we just kind of winging it and just going with the default setting? Perfect example, you mentioned the going from WooCommerce to Shopify, the classic category to collections shift. And I'm sure plenty of listeners and viewers out there, if you've ever seen a site and you click on the category and it goes collections, you're like, aha, Shopify. I know it straight away. It's always such a big giveaway. And I know there's so many things with like the duplicate URLs that Shopify has so many issues with, the dodgy canonical stuff that happens. It automatically adds in categories and subcategories into the URL, so you don't just get collections, primary category, products, or whatever. You get a list of subcategories, and it's like, okay, right. So if this product is in multiple categories, how is this going to work? How are you canonicalizing this? All this kind of stuff. And if you just kind of go in blind and you don't think about the implementations, and exactly as you're saying there, Andy, like you're brought in at the 11th hour to be like, so here's our redirect map. And you're like, I need to change all of this redirect map. You've spent hours doing this, and it's all kind of not great. And that's such a difficult conversation to have. It is so much easier to understand the accountability, the responsibility, and all that kind of stuff earlier on, and have those conversations about the KPIs. And here's what my suggestion would be square one rather than coming in and being like, you probably should have done that 2 weeks ago. Sorry. Like we should have had this conversation before.
Yeah, and you don't want difficult conversations, do you? Ultimately, I try and avoid difficult conversations with clients. So, you know, the more you can affect earlier on, the better.
Definitely. So we're talking about minimizing risk. I think there's a lot of different sides to this. We mentioned the different types of migrations as well, right?
Yeah.
So what would be kind of like your kind of best practice stuff for minimizing that risk and thinking about how you can give that advice to clients or in-house, the other marketing team and the developers to minimize the risk as much as possible when we're thinking about all the different types of migrations?
So I would preference always like to keep URLs the same if possible. Obviously, if it's unavoidable,
I think there's a golden rule from John Mueller that was like, if you can not change a URL, don't change a URL. Like, if you can do everything in your power to not change it, don't change it.
Yeah, exactly. And I've had instances where we've done that, and it's taken sometimes 6 months for Google to go, yeah, okay, that's actually the new URL, even though you've got the redirect in place. There are other signals that come into play. Backlinks, internal links. Have you not updated all your internal links, and it's still pointing to the old URL that's then redirecting within your page copy? Have you updated your PPC URLs, because they can even be classified as a source to how they found that URL? Sometimes people forget that actually we need to update the URLs in our paid campaign as well. So things like that can really delay Google re-indexing the new URL, and it can affect essentially your rankings in that short term while it's figuring all of that out. So the less redirects you have to do, the better. But obviously we're aware that sometimes you're going to have to go from category to collections, but that's fine. Let's try and minimize other risks, so you don't want to have a long list of risks. If you're going to have to do one thing, let's try and minimize that in other areas. Internal links, I mentioned that. Big thing is quite often people don't realize that the internal links on the in-page copy, they'll all need updating if you're having URL changes, whether that's from categories to collections, whether it's from .co.uk to .com, or whether it's subdomain to subfolder. If you're not updating those internal links within that page copy, you are still telling Google that those pages are the old URL, and then it's going to have to go through the redirect. And it's just delaying that time again to make sure that you're getting the right pages indexed and found.
Yeah, the internal link side of thing is such a big part of it. That's been maybe my number one thing I've noticed that has been the pain point for me in the migrations I've done, is having that conversation with the developer. We had a developer straight up refuse to redirect stuff in the blog post because we've been making content with them. They're an SEO client with us, and it was an external developer. And I was like, oh, by the way, linking from all of the category, like the blog categories of the blog content stuff, to category pages, to product pages, to other content pages, to some landing pages. You mentioned PPC stuff there as well. Like, you're spot on, Andy, where you get that moment where you realize, oh, they didn't do those redirects. They just redirected everything, but didn't actually update the original source of the link.
Yeah.
That is not a redirect. That is a separate job that needs to be done, unfortunately, pretty manually. And like I said, I've encountered many times where we mentioned category to collections. I've had product to products before, and blog to news, or blog to blogs, like tiny little changes that at the time maybe somebody didn't even notice, or they thought like, oh, it's blogs probably, I don't need to check, everything's a blog, it'll be fine, just check in there. Oh, this new CMS uses news instead of blog, or whatever it is. Tiny little changes like that, and we realized hundreds of internal links were completely wrong. And then, as you said, going through the redirects, which then slows down the indexing process, and the client is there like, oh, our content isn't performing as well as it was before, or these product pages who had loads of internal links from all of our content previously are now not ranking as well or not getting as much traffic. Like, yeah, because nobody can find them. Like, without
Yeah.
searching through the site navigation and finding the bloody thing, you can't naturally find it. You land on a blog post and then click on a thing that then redirects, and then, or maybe you didn't do the redirect and it ends in a 404, God forbid. It can be such a hassle. I'm so glad you brought that one up, because that has been the number one pain
Yeah.
point for me, for sure.
Yeah, it can be a big project in itself if you have to retrospectively go and fix all that. It can be a lot of work. Another one I've had is like with Magento, it automatically will attribute .html at the end of every product URL. There is an option to turn that off.
Yeah.
I've had clients in the past who'll say, am I okay to press this button? It's like, no, you're not okay to press that button, because you've got such a long-term understanding of those URLs have .html. You'll have all these backlinks, all these internal links, other potential sources of Google's understanding of those URLs. You change the thousands and thousands of product URLs at once, and it could actually have quite a drastic difference for a while. So, like, it's doing no harm. It's fine. Leave it as it is, please. We've had those instances before as well, and I think another one is people probably not realizing that we've done this beautiful new rebrand. We don't need all of the content we had on the previous site. Let's just have fresh content. Then they've not realized that there's links built to previous content, or it ranks really well for a particular keyword that they had no idea about. And then they go live and they're then questioning why the traffic's tanked. And it's actually because they've not migrated all the content over. Massively changing the site structure, as well, can have an impact. Again, for internal linking purposes or URL purposes. So yeah, those are the common things I see. There'll be others, no doubt. But it's about minimizing them. So if you need to do redirects, let's try and not forget the content as well, and internal links, so these types of things are critical. So if we can minimize it to one major risk rather than 5 major risks, you're going to have a better migration in the end of it.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's so many of those little forgotten bits and pieces, or like we said, that ties totally back into having that SEO person in at day one, right? Because you hopefully, listeners and viewers out there, if you didn't know already, you're now learning from Andy that you should be thinking about these things from the get-go, right? That is the whole point of you being there, to have those conversations. People just saying, oh, can I click this button? Well, that button changes 50,000 URLs across the site, so think very, very carefully before just clicking that button. But like, oh, but it seems so much tidier. I don't need .html at the end of my URL. Like, you've had 10 years of it, so maybe don't touch it. Like, tiny little decisions like that can have such a big impact. The one I experienced, it was the first ever project I worked on here at Canada, so coming on 3 years ago now. We had somebody come to us like, we've seen a really bad impact from a migration. It's gone pretty badly. What's going on? Can you, assess what the impact and what happened, essentially? Turns out they had not correctly redirected their images. And I can't remember the exact industry, like what would you describe it? It was a lot of like private hire for luxury, like vehicles and planes and all kinds of stuff. It was like super, super high-end stuff I will only ever dream of. And it was this like, yeah, you get a lot of traffic from your images. Did you have a look at your search console and flick over from web to image and see the kind of clicks and impressions you're getting? And everybody just kind of stared at me blankly over the Zoom call, and I was like, right, yeah. So you used to get like 30 to 40% of your entire clicks and impressions, even more so from I think it was like 60% of impressions from your images, and you kind of just ignored them. And exactly like you were saying there, Andy, there was a CMS thing where the CDN that they had moved to changed the URL, so they just completely screwed it up. There was no domain change, there was no like anything like that. They tried to keep it as simple as possible, but something they didn't factor in and didn't think about was like, oh yeah, we have loads of like high quality images that actually rank pretty well in Google search when you're searching for Google images. Turns out we lost a bunch of traffic because of that. And I was kind of going through me like, you should have done this, should have done this. There's like 15,000 of them, so be my guest. I'll leave that with you developers to sort that one out.
When you're a luxury type business where image sells, you are probably going to be getting a lot of clicks from Google image searches, and it's really something you shouldn't neglect, like you said. That's very important. Another thing that's actually just fresh on my mind, so writing an article on it, is JavaScript. I've worked with a client that's new platform that was, the new platform was JavaScript heavy, client-side rendered, and their rankings plummeted overnight. And that was because Google was struggling to basically read and render the content. They had JavaScript changing the title tag, meta description, and H1 on the page. JavaScript loaded in all the internal link filters, the global navigation. And they were sat on that for about 12 months before they realized potentially we need to get someone to sort this out. So it's been a long-term thing as well. So it takes a lot of time to then turn that around, because as you might know, you go to a developer and just go, well, change it to server-side rendering. That's not easy. It's not a small job.
That's not a click of a button.
It's that is potentially a massive thing. So when you are migrating as well, you need to factor into like, what framework are we building this on? Are we building it in React? Are we building it in can we do it in Next.js within React that has the server-side rendering capabilities in there from scratch? So you've also got to think about the type of website you are. If you're an e-commerce site, I would definitely recommend server-side rendering 100%. If you can't get around it, then there are other things you can do to sort of cache that dynamic rendering as well. So you're serving bots the HTML version and serving users the client-side rendering version. But yeah, that's really important as well. And, get that wrong, and it can have quite a disastrous impact on your business.
100%. So, like I said, it's kind of been all doom and gloom, as it is for all the risks and the possible issues and stuff like that. But there are benefits to it as well, right? I think there's a lot of positives that can come from. You sound so chip, Randy. I appreciate it. I know some people go in and see it as such a stressful thing, but we're talking about like moving from different versions of CMSs. That can be a huge improvement. We mentioned mobile responsiveness earlier. Obviously, that's a bit less of a thing now. Hopefully, that was more of a thing 5-10 years ago. But what are the other kind of, from your experiences, what are the other kind of positives and benefits you can see from a successful migration?
Yeah. Probably the main thing is UX increases in performance. So that migration can improve your conversion rate. So that's a huge thing. Even if it improves it by 0.5%, that could potentially make a lot of money over a period of a year. You might have an improved checkout experience that isn't really part of the whole SEO piece. So improving that UX, improving people converting, improving that user experience can be a massive advantage of migrating. Also, at the same time, improving your site speed. Like I said, if you're going server-side rendering and you're just serving one HTML to the user in the browser rather than a HTML and a JavaScript file that needs to then be parsed and rendered in the browser, that can have a good long-term benefit as well. So the main thing really is the kind of like, if you get it right, the revenue benefits of improving that experience, improving that conversion, can have some really good positive impacts on on your revenue, and that just helps SEO as well, because UX and SEO go hand in hand so well together. You know, if there's people are interacting better on your website, there's less bounce backs over time, that will play a small part of it for improving our core vitals metrics. Although it's not a massive thing, you should want to do it if you can in the migration. You know, page speed on mobile, vital, all these things. And then as well, just like future proofing yourself, you know. So with improved technology, you're getting ahead of yourself for the next 5-10 years, you know. So you're future proofing the business. Whereas if you're remaining on that older technology, you might end up becoming limited to what you can do. So again, I think that is a key thing to maybe mention, is, you know, you're future proofing yourself for the next 5-10 years potentially by migrating to another platform or improved technology. And then it might be things like better integration. So maybe there's a particular reason why you want to move to a HubSpot CMS, so you can have seamless integration with your CRM system, you know, and maybe your business is all about generating leads and then converting that lead offline. So, you know, it might be things like that that are going to help you offline as well as online.
Yeah, 100%. I think the UX side of things is something I feel like it comes up every single episode now. Like you're totally right. They are so hand in hand now, and thankfully we seem to be moving in the right direction. A lot of people seem to be more aware on both sides of the equation when it comes to SEO and UX, and I know the term SXO, so search experience optimization, has been floating around a little while as well. There's that kind of, like you said, conversion rates, navigation, all this kind of stuff ties so heavily into the user experience and can make a massive impact, exactly as you're saying there, Andy, on things like revenue. The KPIs that you're being measured on can be massively affected by little design changes and UX changes and things like that. Future-proofing is such an interesting one. It was a conversation I had, the recent migration, I mentioned the WooCommerce to Shopify one we did a couple of months ago. That future-proofing side of things, because it was they're a pretty small company overall. Like, it was a big investment for them to go through that process, have us in as their usual like SEO, you know, retainer in their agency, and use that retainer time to then do part of the migration project. It's an investment from their time to learn new things and, like I said, understand how to update this CMS in a different way. Also, from an external developer, paying them for their time, it's going to be thousands and thousands of pounds by the end of it. And for small businesses, that can be a massive investment.
Yeah.
And I think you're totally right. If you can future-proof yourself for the next 5 years, the next 10 years, you shouldn't looking to be migrate every couple of years. I think I use the analogy of, like, think of it the opposite of a phone. Like, so many people want to get the latest Samsung, the latest Apple iPhone, whatever it is. Like, oh, I've got the Apple, iPhone 14. I want the 15 Pro or whatever. It's like, this is more like going from, I'm using a weird example there, from like 10 to 15 or something like that. You shouldn't look to just update to the latest version just because you can. There should actually be a reason behind it. And I think you're totally right. If you can bring in some foresight, some forward thinking, and some future proofing, that can really set you off well for the next few years of, we've gone headless now. Like you mentioned headless CMSs earlier, with the thought that, we might want to go into more, app integrations and other platform integrations in the future. So you don't migrate in 2024 and then realize, we need a bunch of app integrations and stuff in 2026. We now need to migrate again and work out how this all integrates. Having a bit of foresight and forward thinking, I think, can make a massive difference. And again, it's selling that to that client, right? Understanding, if you do it this way and we get it right, this is you good for the next 5 years, probably the next 10 years sometimes. I think 10 years is sometimes pushing it. As you said earlier, how quickly technology moves these days. But I think there are a lot of ways where that can really be a positive. Don't worry, you don't need to do this every 6 months, every 18 months. You won't need to touch this. This will be a long-term investment rather than a quick little short-term investment. And I think that can be quite reassuring to some clients, I think.
It's a big selling point, I think once clients realise that if future-proofing yourself by, years at least, then it's easier for them to see the return, the longer term return on that investment, rather than it being a short term thing.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that is a whistle-stop tour. I know I said a whistle-stop tour. This is a long conversation, but still, there is so much to cover about migration stuff. We could be here for hours.
No.
But thank you so much for joining me, Andy. I really appreciate you coming on, chatting migration, and bringing all of your years of expertise and experience to the
Thank you
show.
for having me on. It's been great. Yeah.
So, folks, go to andyfrobisher.com. Go and check out and follow Andy on Twitter and LinkedIn. Check out all the awesome stuff. Like you said, you're working on a bunch of articles. I know you're writing some very cool stuff. You're working with some cool publishers and some new clients and stuff like that. Very excited to see what you're going to be working on over the next few months and see what the consultancy and freelance world will be like for you, Andy. So, folks, go and check out Andy. Links in the show notes and the description. That wraps up this episode of Search with Candour. Thank you so much for watching or listening wherever you are watching or listening. Please do give us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, all the usual podcast places. Give us a like and a subscribe and all that kind of stuff if you're watching on YouTube. All the usual podcast and YouTube stuff that YouTubers tell you to do. If you have any questions or anything like that, please do leave them in the comments. There is also a Q&A and poll option on Spotify as well, so you can actually interact with the show and ask questions and stuff like that as well. And Mark and I can address those in our upcoming monthly recap episode that will be at the end of April, coming out next week as well. So stay tuned for all of that coming up later in April. I've got some amazing guests lined up coming up over the next few weeks. We're talking about everything from GA4 to how to write blog posts that actually convert and work and basically do that for a living. I'm interviewing a very, very interesting blogger who has transformed their business just by writing really good content, essentially in a very competitive space. And so many other guests, so many other topics we'll be covering over the next few weeks as well. Of course, Brighton SEO is coming up next week as well. You're listening to this on Monday, so it's this week. Have an amazing time. Say hello to everybody for me. If you see any of the guests on the show and you've listened to the show, please let them know that you enjoyed their episode. That means a huge deal to me, and I'm sure they'll really appreciate it as well. If you are going, have a brilliant time, basically. Unfortunately, I'm not there. None of us from Candour are there this time, but we'll be there in force in October. So I think we'll be attending a few more events around the year as well. I know we're planning to go to a few other events around the UK and around Europe potentially as well. So stay tuned for that coming up in the next few months and throughout the rest of the year. In the meantime, thank you so much for listening and have a lovely week.